Okay, so let me start with the review. Welcome everybody back to Ecclesiastes, lockdown of Ecclesiastes. We are at chapter number 8. Let me quickly do a review of chapter number 7. We look closely at wisdom in chapter number 7 after considering Solomon's Beatitudes, the 8 different points which he cites at the beginning of chapter number 7, verses 1 to 10. Last week we saw that we need he was actually talking about wisdom at large from verses 11 to 29, and he was telling us different reasons why we need wisdom. And we looked at 5 different aspects of it. We need wisdom for assortment, that is to understand when to balance and how. We need wisdom for acceptance, to allow to understand what God allows and what God doesn't allow. We need wisdom to be atop. That means we need to understand that there is an advantage that wisdom gives us over others who are around us. Even if they are very powerful people, wisdom is more valuable than their power. The fourth thing we saw was wisdom is needed to give ourselves some allowance. That things done in wisdom aren't foolproof. We might make mistakes, and that is allowed. And that we will need wisdom also for avoidance, mainly to avoid listening to everything that is spoken about us. It may be behind our back, or it may be just pure gossip, but we need to avoid listening, because by chance we may listen to somebody cursing us, and that disturbs us. So wisdom is needed for all this. But after that we looked at the hindrances to wisdom, and there were 3 major hindrances I put forward while we were looking at that chapter. One is one of the hindrances to wisdom can be shifting the balance towards extreme positions. We may take up extreme positions, and that is not at all wisdom. It is a hindrance to wisdom, so we should avoid extreme positions and come to more moderate positions. The second thing we saw was that if we try to attain wisdom by our own strength and we want to do it by ourselves, then that is a hindrance to wisdom. Wisdom doesn't come like that. We cannot determine and get wisdom. The third hindrance that is cited in chapter number 7 to wisdom is an ensnaring woman. She is an hindrance to becoming wise. So this is the review of chapter number 7. Now we will go to chapter number 8. Let me begin with chapter number 8. Uh, when we read chapter number 8, verse 1, he's again going into uh, telling us the advantages of wisdom. So I will call it, he continues with felicitation of wisdom. Verse 1 says, "Who is like a wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the sternness of his face is changed." Now, despite the hindrances, what the critic or Solomon says is every attempt should be made to be wise, because among men there is nothing more valuable in a character or in any characteristic that a man can imbibe, and nothing more valuable than wisdom. When we looked at Ecclesiastes chapter 1 onwards, from the beginning, there are only 2 things that the critic has spoken against wisdom. Otherwise, he has been constantly in favor of wisdom. The 2 things, if you remember in the earlier chapters, which he cited, and I think it is chapter number 1 itself, where he says that the increase of knowledge increases sorrow, and therefore wisdom, because it is dependent on knowledge, brings about an increase in sorrow, not directly but indirectly. We need more knowledge for more wisdom, and more knowledge means more sorrow. So more wisdom means more sorrow. So increase of wisdom does bring sorrow. And then he said that the fate of the foolish and the wise is the same when it comes to death. So death doesn't treat a wise or a fool differently. So in death, it doesn't matter if you are wise or fool. But these are the only 2 arguments that Solomon brings against wisdom. But then onwards, chapter 2 onwards, for everything he considered in every chapter, we know that it was wisdom that was helping him consider. So wisdom cannot be put down at any point. And here he is bringing that felicitation again. He has been constantly citing all the advantages of being wise, and here he says things which we can understand as a wise man is a step ahead in what he knows about life, a step ahead of all ordinary people. A wise man understands what's happening in life, so he can interpret the things that are happening around him. He can decipher, he can discern, he can come to conclusions, and he's always a step ahead of others. And that's very crucial for success and victory in life, that we are step ahead of those who are competing with us. The next thing he says is that a wise man is in a position to teach others. See, that's why the word interpretation is cited over there. Interpretation is mainly required, so it is a vocal activity. If it was just discernment, it was a mental activity. But because the word interpretation is used there, it's more of a vocal activity. So he is going to share it with others. So a wise man is in a position to tell others and teach others. That itself is a blessing to the society. A wise man can be identified by his face. Now, that's a very interesting observation made by the critic. A wise man can be identified by his face because his countenance, his face, will show that he is a wise man, because there will be a shine on it. Now, that is what he says. We'll go into that. A wise man will also have a pleasant face. That's why he uses the sternness of his face is changed. So he will have a pleasant face. He will be a bold man, but he will still be a pleasant man. But after making felicitations about wisdom, I would like to take your attention straight away to verses number 16 and 17, which are the last two verses of this chapter, where he says, "When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, even though one sees no sleep or day or night, then I saw all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover it, yet he will not find it. Moreover, though a wise man attempts to know it, he will not be able to find it." So after felicitating, he is now going into the limitations. He says that wisdom cannot understand how things happen under the sun. That is the limitation of wisdom. A wise man can keep his eyes open, not sleep at all, keep watching everything that happens, but he will not be able to make sense of how things work under the sun. It is absolutely unpredictable and uncertain, and there is no reason or logic to it. See, we need a lot of help of patterns and reasons and logic to understand things that happen around us. When we see patterns, when we see sequences, when we see progressions, when we see some kind of a reasonable logic to things that happen, that's when we understand things. And what is the biggest sign that we have understood it? That we slowly start predicting similar things around us, and even before they happen. So that's the first sign of we having understood it. And once we are there, that's the sprouting of wisdom inside of us. But when we look around at things that happen under the sun, Solomon is saying this: there is no pattern, there is no predictability, there is no logic or reason to it. Anything happens, it's a disorder, it's chaos. So what we should remember at this point of time is that, remember the last verse of chapter number 7, he says this: "Truly this only I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes." So he cites that creation in its original form, we can understand that creation in its original form was not like this, but sin created this disorder, sin created this chaos, sin created this unpredictability, sin brought this randomness. So wisdom, though it is the biggest or the greatest attribute that man can inculcate into his characteristics, it still is well within limitations. I mean, there is It is not a foolproof attainment you will have when you get wisdom. So there is a need of something greater than wisdom for security or peace. That's what he will shift us towards now when we go towards the end of Ecclesiastes. That in all the things we have seen, wisdom is the best, but then wisdom has limitations. So there is something greater than wisdom that we should aspire for. Now, before I go into the next verses, I want to go back to verse 1 where he says that a man's wisdom makes his face shine. Something about the face. I just want to say a few things there. A man's face is a catalogue of a man's character. It is the map of a man's mind and the geography of a man's soul. Now, this is what somebody has written about the face of a man. Catalogue of a man's character, map of a man's mind, and the geography of a man's soul. What is inside of a man shows on his face, on his countenance. The face reflects what is inside. Some of us can very easily spot characteristics on the face of a person, isn't it? Let me cite a few examples. Now, when a person is hateful, revengeful, or angry, it is easy to spot it on his face. There is a certain way his eyebrows go, his eyes go, his cheeks go, the overall expression of his face is very visible. Even if he is making a very good attempt at hiding it, it's very difficult to. So the face is a mirror of the heart. It shows what's inside. When a man is cynical is somebody who is always sarcastic, or is always pushing people down, looking at ways to pull their legs or intimidate them. When a person is cynical, this is also quite visible on the face. If you are a very keen observer, you can make out a cynical person just by the way the lips and the eyes go. When a person is hypocritical, that means he is not genuine, he is making up a show. That is also very visible in the plastic nature of his expressions. That means his expressions are not smooth, they are not natural, and somebody who is sharp can spot the artificiality. When a person is kind, it is easy to spot the kindness on his face. When a person is generous, when a person is cheerful despite the troubles around him, you can make out that it is not hypocritical, it is surely cheerfulness flowing out of the abundance of the heart. So a face of a man reflects a lot of things that are inside, and we should be careful. We may move around thinking that we are hiding a lot of things. Of course, sometimes in our busy world, we also are not observing those around us. But if you observe carefully, a lot of things can be made out just by looking at the face, just by looking at small things. I am sure many of you know that I do pick up a lot of things just by little change of expressions on your lips, eyes, or even how your face looks. So a critic here is stating that just like all these things, wisdom, if it is inside of you, will also be visible on your face. People will know that this is a wise man. Now, don't ask me the exact expressions on the different parts of your face, but that's what the critic says, that it is possible to spot a wise man just by looking at his face and how he conducts himself. Now I will move on to the remaining verses number 2 to 14. Now, when we consider these remaining verses, the critic is actually today going to consider, in chapter number 8, he's going to consider power. So we have seen riches, we have seen success, we've seen wealth, we've seen wisdom, we have seen the works of a man, we've seen, so today we're going to look at power. Now in this chapter, there are 3 powers. Of course, there's a 4th one, but very silently emerging. There are 3 powers that he's mainly talking about. The first power he talks about is the power of a king. The second power he talks about is the power of the wicked. And the third power he talks about is the power of forces. Um, I will go into it probably not in that same order. You will constantly see arguments coming based on three filters of Ecclesiastes: time, death, and randomness. March of time, certainty of death, and randomness of life. You will constantly see these three interplaying in this chapter, and he uses them everywhere through the book. He highlights the power of these three filters over humankind. Okay, so we're now going to consider the power of a king, the power of the wicked, and the power of the forces. Let's look at verses 2 to 5, where he's discussing about the power of a king. He starts off by saying that the king's words should be honored. Now, we cannot help but remember at this point that Solomon himself was a king. So, we cannot expect him to say anything else. He will always say that you should honor the king. But since he is writing this not just for his own subjects, he's considering it even for future generations, there is an element of truthfulness in it. Now, why should the king be honored? When we look at it from the context of the entire scriptures, including the New Testament, we know that one of the reasons we should obey the commandments of the king or the ruler of a land, the highest authority in the land, who makes the rules. For us, it is the parliament, not the prime minister, and headed by the president. So, one of the reasons we should obey the commandments of the king is because we should remember that God has placed him in that place. So, when we honor him, we are honoring God. So, that's why we should listen to the words of the king. The second reason why we should honor the words of the king is because it is demanded by God that we obey our authorities placed above us. So it is a commandment for us. The first thing we do is because God has placed him there. The second is because God asks us to do it, that we should pray for our authorities and we should listen to them. The third reason why we should honor the rulers is because in case we are bound by an oath to him, like for example, if you have become a citizen of a land, like if you become a citizen of the United States, then you have to take that citizenship under oath. So you put your hand on a copy of the Constitution or something, some symbol, and then you take an oath that you will be obedient to the laws of the land. So if you're bound by an oath, of course, we are born in India, so we think we are not bound to an oath because we didn't make an oath, but we are bound to the Constitution, and especially those who are taking an oath at the time of an employment. For example, government employees, they all have to take an oath. They have to sign contracts. So those kind of people, they should remain true to the oath. God is very serious about how we treat vows and oaths that we make. The only time, now listen, this is important. The only time that the king's word can be sidelined are when they come against the word of God himself. So we should remember the sequence of power. On top is God, then is the rule of the land. Okay, on top is God, which includes the word of God. Then is the rule of the land. And parallelly, you can also have the structure of the father in the family or the husband. That's how the power flow is in the scripture. And at any point of time, none of the powers that are under, be it the church leaders, be it the nation leaders, or be it the family head, none of them can make a law that contravenes the law of God. When that happens, it is God to whom we have to show our allegiance. But if it is something where God has no concern, that if your father says, if you study, then I will buy you a bike. Now, there is no contravention of any law of God happening there, so you better honor your dad and get your bike. So, we have to understand how this power flow takes place, what is the line of authority. So when the king is against the God himself, that's the only time we are relieved from obeying the king. Now, the power of the king is so much that the critic says that if you think of disobeying a king, then you should not do it hastily. You should take your time, think about it, because he is so powerful that he can make consequences to happen for your disobedience. Now, a person like Dheeraj sitting in Dubai can understand how powerful a king can be, because a place like UAE is run by the king, Dubai is run by a king. So, whatever the king says is the law of that place. So, he is a totalitarian in that kingdom, and he will do whatever he pleases, and nobody can ask him a question. So if he sees that somebody is defiant, then he is displeased by that defiance, and he will punish. He will punish, even for whatever looks evil in his eyes. It need not be evil in your eyes. It need not be evil in the eyes of a lot of people around you. But if it appears evil in his eyes, he will punish. So that's the power of a king. He is very powerful. So that's the second thing the critics bring forward, that if you disobey the king, there will be consequences that the king can make happen. And then he says that a wise man will always listen to the king. But before that, he says that where the word of the king is, there is power. Wherever he is recognized as a king, his power will be seen. It could be his throne room. The throne room is the place where he passes the laws, he passes decrees. His power is there when he is in his audience chamber. Now, audience chamber is a place where people go to seek for mercy, make prayers, ask for forgiveness. So, when the king decides to be merciful in his audience chamber, when he says, okay, do not kill this man, then that's his will, and nobody asks question whether it is justice or not justice. The king wants it, it happens. Or if he is in his banqueting hall where he's celebrating and he's saying, okay, give another round of drinks or food to the people there, or give them something else. When he's in the banqueting hall, he's celebrating, he's happy, and his word is the command over there. In the battlefield, his word is the command. When he says march, everybody marches. When he says retreat, fall back, everybody falls back. When he says go fight unto death, people will do that. The soldiers will rally behind the words of the king. His word is powerful. There is power in his word. Even in a foreign court where he goes, his word, he represents the entire land over there. He can make peace, he can make conquest, he can even relinquish his power. Even if he is traveling in disguise and he grants favors or finds out people who need to be punished, his word is powerful. Now, why I talk about influence of a king and his word is because at this point of time, I just wanted to draw your attention to the king that is Jesus. All this is true for Jesus, and so we should never let our eyes of Jesus as a king. And when we think of the powers of a king, or when we think about Jesus, we should associate these both thoughts. The only difference between other kings and Jesus is that Jesus doesn't do whatever he pleases. He does what pleases his Father. And so, his reign is just and righteous. Critic closes by saying that those who do not challenge the power of the king will remain safe, and they will see no evil in the reign of the king. Now, wisdom will help you discern what to do and when to do when you are under the influence of a king. Now, that's a very important statement that he brings out in verse number 5. At the end, he says, and the wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment, because for every matter there is a time and judgment. So, wisdom helps you to respond to the power of a king. How to deal with the power of a king? When you gauge that the king is powerful, you should never forget the consequences of it. Of disobeying him, you should never forget the influence of his word. And when you have to make a decision this way or that way, you should not underestimate the power of the king. And Solomon says you should consider two things: time and judgment. Now, what does time and judgment means? Time means when to do it. Judgment means what to do. So when you are confronting the power of a king, you should remember two things. Remember when to do what, then only you should take a step. You should consider all the aspects of the powerful king, and then you should look at taking a decision. So there is, while considering power, he says that there are three kinds of power. The first one is the power of a king, and the power of a king is very, very powerful. And as a man, you should always include that in your equation. The power of the authorities should be included in your equation. Wisdom helps you in considering that. Now, before I go into considering the power of the forces, I just want to bring to your mind that when he is considering power, he is not giving it to everybody. I mean, it's not for common people to reach the echelons of power. He is not considering it for normal people. So power will come to only a few. That's why he takes up the example of the king. True power, raw power, is only going to come to a few people. Most of the people, 99.99% of the people, will never reach that kind of power. They will always be under some power. So while we were considering the other things like riches, anybody can become rich. Success, anybody can become successful. Projects and the hard work that they did and the wealth that they gained, anybody could have that. Wisdom, anybody can have it. But power, it's not for everybody. So he's not even saying that, okay, do this for power, do that for power. There is no formula given out for power here. He is only asking us to respond to the powers that are around us. Well, a few of us can reach the place of the power of a king. Maybe, who knows? But then that's just a handful of people. Rest of us have to respond to the power. Now let me go to the power of the forces, which is the second power that he considers. And we see that in verses 6 to 8. Now, other than the king, the man is also subject to other powers which can increase his misery on the earth. See, he is only considering most people to go through misery. And he says that if you are not wise about how to respond to these powers, then these forces can bring their influence on a man at any time without notice, and there is no way he can know which force will hit him, when and how. So he will have to take the help of wisdom to respond to these powers. Now let me list out the powers that he has mentioned in verses 6, 7 and 8. He says that, verse 7, for he does not know what will happen, so who can tell him what will happen? Then he says, no one has power over the spirit to retain the spirit, and no one has power in the day of the death, and there is no release from that war, and the wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. So there are four subcategories of forces that he mentions there. Number one, man has no control over his spirit. So there is a force much more powerful than man that works on his spirit himself. Man has no power over it. His spirit is his own. His spirit is what makes him him. But man has no control over it. He cannot do anything to retain his spirit. So when his time comes, he has to leave. The spirit has to leave the body. There is no request, no technique, no formula, nothing. So there is a power greater than his power to keep that spirit there. No one and no power can stop it. Therefore, he should deal with, so that's the lesson. Therefore, a man should deal with his spirit properly. A man should deal with his spirit properly, so that when it has to go, it goes to where it is supposed to go. I hope you understood what I'm trying to say there. A man has no control over his spirit, and it will go anytime. So therefore, a man should always be ready. He should keep his spirit so ready that when his spirit leaves him, and he will have no control over that time and that moment, because there is a power, a force greater than the power he can ever have, which will take his spirit away from him, and it will go away to where it is supposed to go. At that time, he should have till that time he should have treated his spirit properly, because once the spirit is gone, the man can do nothing about it. His time is over. His time is over. So the first um, power that comes as a consideration in the power of the forces is the the power that controls over a man's spirit. The next powerful force that has an impact on the man is the power of death. Man has no power over death. Death is more powerful than the man. When death takes hold of his spirit, there is no way that man can overcome death and come back alive. So therefore, he should align with the one who has overcome death and gives us everlasting life. But what most of us do is we keep playing games on both the sides. We want to play some games with death and some games with life. We should know which side we will land on if we keep playing two games. So while we're talking about the power of the forces, the first power we considered is that man has no control over his spirit. There is a power greater that controls his spirit, and then he needs to be ready with his spirit to be given out anytime. Second is, man has no power over death, so death is more powerful than man. So this is not, the first and the second point are two distinct points. The third thing, man will get no reprieve in the war called life. That's why he says that there is no release from that war. He doesn't say there is no release from war. It says there is no release from that war. Which war? The war that is called life. Life is a battle, and a man will have to fight it. He cannot escape the battle of life. So that's a power that is working over man, which will not allow him to take a break or rest. There are some things in our life over which we have no control. We cannot, and they are more powerful. One is the spirit leaving us, one is death taking hold of us, third is this war called life. Every day morning we have to get up and fight. Till we sleep we fight. Then we get up again, we fight. And all through the year we fight. And decades go by and we fight. And we think, when will this get over? But Solomon says it will not get over on the earth. As long as you live, you have to fight. There will be no reprieve in the war called life. You cannot retire from it or withdraw from it. You will have to fight till your last breath. You cannot send a substitute to fight this life's war. You yourself have to fight it. You cannot find a reason or an excuse to take an exemption in this battle called life. So what can a man do? A man will therefore have to find extraordinary strength and a source of power and resource which is continual and continuous. So you can see that Solomon is building his case towards God. He is taking us logically towards why we need to get connected, because there are so many things in life that are needing the intervention and the help and the supply of God, even to live day after day. It's so hard when people around us commit suicides and end their lives. Even just yesterday, we're still not sure what happened, but one of the girls committed suicide who was coming to Grace Central, and there is also a suspicion that somebody might have killed her. But if it was a suicide, it's just because that person was not ready to face life and fight the war for one more day. One more day looks heavy on them. So it becomes so powerful that it forces that person to even take away their life. We should know how to respond. Wisdom helps us respond to these forces. The last thing that is there in verse number 8 is that there is one more powerful force that man should not forget, that man cannot escape his wickedness. Man should not think that he will remain wicked and he will escape his wickedness. Listen to this. Whether a righteous man will get his reward here or not, there is no guarantee. So suppose you remain a righteous man, you will expect rewards, but whether you will get it or not, there's no surety. But a wicked man will not escape the consequences of his wickedness. We may not see it, but the critic says there is a certainty that he will pay for his wickedness. The power of justice is built into the nature of things, that the wickedness will not go scot-free. The wicked man will be punished. There is a brute force at work in nature that brings this to pass. So there are 4 powerful forces we considered. Man has no control over his spirit. Man has no power over death. Man will not get reprieve in a war called life. And man cannot expect to escape his wickedness. Now we come to the third power that he is considering, and that is the power of the wicked. And that we see in verses 9 to 14, the power of the wicked. He talks about the power that man exercises over another man. And this is unlike the power of a king. This is a forcefully taken power. Just because that man is in some way more powerful than the another man. So it is not a widespread power. It has limited influence. It can definitely grow in influence, but for most people, you do not have too many people under you to become wicked. A wicked person is a man who takes away the right of another person. Whatever is rightfully theirs, if it is taken away from them by a more powerful person, that is wickedness. Not giving somebody their due, not being fair to them, not doing justice with them is wickedness. And a powerful man can perpetrate wickedness. Now, however, what is noteworthy in verse number 9 is that he says that there is a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. The usage of the word, there is a time. Now, there are times when wicked will use their power and hurt other people. There are times when wicked will attain seats and positions of power and let their wickedness hurt those who are at the receiving end of it. Earlier when we were studying, we heard about oppression, that there is a lot of oppression around us, and there is a good possibility that it is all across the system, even going up to the king. But other than that, there are different kinds of wickedness that men perpetrate on each other, and it's all quite known to all of us that what it can be, so I'm not going to enlist it here right now. Now, when he talks about the wicked, he's not going to glorify what the wicked does, but he makes a very interesting statement in verse 10, where he says that, "Then I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This also is Hevel, vanity." Now, what is he saying there? He goes on to tell a few things that happened to the wicked people under the sun. He says that it is possible that a wicked might get a decent burial. Yes, wicked people might get a decent burial. But listen forward. He says that those who come to this grave, this burial, this funeral service, might deliver wonderful eulogies. They will sing praises to this wicked man. They will say, "Oh, what a man he was. Oh, what a great man he was." They will say all these things. And listen to what the critic says. It is possible that this could happen in the very place where this wicked person, who was once a righteous man, an upright man, gave it all up to perpetrate injustice and crime. It is a place that has seen both the sides of this man. It has seen his righteousness and uprightness. It has also seen his wickedness and injustice. They have seen both the sides, and still many people will choose to sing his praises. So understand this. A wicked man's power will extend beyond his death, even up to the funeral service. The power of the hold of the wicked will extend up to the eulogies. But then see what he says next. The critic says, however, a whole lot of people, even a city, will forget him forever. His power ceases with his funeral. A wicked man, however powerful he may be on the earth when he is alive, his power may extend to his funeral, but not beyond that. And he says this does happen under the sun. But then he says that because the sentence, verse number 11, because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. There is another kind of influence which we talked about in chapter 7, that a wicked man leaves. His influence and power ceases when he dies, but there is a bad influence he leaves on the society. The critic says that events like he mentioned right now, of wonderful funeral and all that, and adding to that the delay in the punishments that the wicked enjoy, makes many a people to consider crime and wickedness as a life option. So the power of wickedness exerts its power in another form by raising up more wicked people. But for his own benefit, it ceases at his funeral. But then the critic goes on to say, verse number 12, that though a sinner does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before God. However powerful the wicked might be, and however long he might live on the planet, most wicked men will see a quick end to their lives. The ones who will live long will be few. So sometimes we may think, oh, the wicked, nothing happens to them. Critic says you are only looking at a few and you are making a conclusion. Most wicked people will not live long. He says on the other end, most of those who fear the Lord, it will be well with them. The converse is also true. Sometimes we say that, oh, he was a nice man, but he lived so short, he died so early. But that may be 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, or 1 in a million who may die like that. But sometimes these few cases get highlighted as if they are the norm. But that's not how the critic says. It's not like that. We may look at a Hitler and a Napoleon and make it as a case study, but they are not norms, they are exceptions. The norm is that the wicked will not live long and the righteous will live long. Their life will be prolonged. And he admits the anomaly, that it does happen to a few. There's one more anomaly he talks about in verse number 14. He says that there is a vanity which occurs on earth, that there are just men to whom it happens according to the work of the wicked again, and there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. This is vanity, heaven. So there are a few where this principle seems to go berserk. There are a few righteous who do get the reward of the wicked, and there are a few righteous who do get the reward of the righteous, of the wicked. So that is the result of the corruption of nature, the fall of man. This randomness that has happened to the perfection has happened after the fall. So it is not just matter or material which got corrupt, but even the laws that govern the matter, be it physical laws or moral laws, even those laws have got corrupted and have become subject to randomness. And that's why we see this in nature, in the life we see around us. That brings us to the conclusion of chapter number 8. In verse number 15, he comes to the same conclusion that he has been concluding again and again from the beginning, that the best thing for a man to do under the sun is to have his fill in food and drink and be joyful in his labor. And these things are his true possessions for that day. And then he says that this person should do this day to day as long as he is alive. Every day, have his portion of food and drink and be joyful in his labor. And remember that these are his only possessions. Everything else is a waste. So today we looked at power. And power doesn't come to many. In fact, we are subjects to power and we are surrounded by power. Powerful people, powerful forces, and people who have wrongfully taken power. So when we were talking about the king, we were talking about unnecessary power. When we were talking about the forces, we were talking about inescapable power. And when we were talking about the wicked, we were talking about accepted power. Why accepted? Because they are around us, they are more powerful, so we have no way to deny it, so we accept them as power around us. So these are necessary power, inescapable power, and the accepted power, which have an influence on us, and we need to know how to respond to it. And wisdom is the best way. To a king, the best way is to remember that there is a time and judgment. To the forces, well, I said that prepare your spirit, be on the side of the one who has overcome death, and take help of the extraordinary strength that comes from the Holy Spirit, and be righteous. And as far as the wicked are concerned, those who are around us, they will probably trouble us for a time, but we should never get overwhelmed by their survival or by their escaping judgment. They surely will face the consequences of how they have lived. The influences goes at the most to their funeral service, but then it's gone. Of course, other people get affected, but if we remain righteous, there is a very good chance that we will get what is promised by God in His scriptures. May God bless you with this study of chapter number 8 of Ecclesiastes.